hard work you've done. I'm Dave Adler. I'm president of the Alturas Institute and adjunct professor of law at University of Idaho. And my colleagues, Don and Dan, will introduce themselves.
Oops.
Don, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm Donald Rogers from Central Connecticut State University. I teach history there. Been involved in the We the People program for many years, and look forward to hearing your comments.
Good morning. I'm Dan Taubman. I'm a senior judge on the Colorado Court of Appeals in Denver, Colorado, and I too have worked with the We the People program for a long time. And congratulations also on participating this morning in the National We the People Challenge.
Please introduce yourselves and your teacher.
So we are Unit 4 from Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, representing Wauwatosa West High School. We are the Wisconsin wildcard team, and we're here on behalf of our teachers, teaching assistants, and our teacher, Mr. Chad Metesky. My name is Carly Courtbine.
I'm Hannah Fuller.
I'm Maggie Heitkemper.
I'm Maggie Schilling.
Great, welcome. Tell us something you've been doing before the virus hit.
Before the virus hit,
I had my track season before the virus hit.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, me as well. And we were working really hard on this, and I guess we've continued with that even despite the virus.
Good. Wonderful. Well, let me turn to the question that you'll be responding to today and about which we'll be asking you some questions. We're working here from question number 3. Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution provides that state legislatures can determine the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives, yet gives Congress the power to make or alter such regulations. What are the advantages and disadvantages of a uniform election process? And then, what responsibility do state legislatures, state election officials, and citizens have in maintaining free and fair elections? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of the trustee and delegate theories of representation as they apply to congressional districts? Please proceed.
Former Albanian Prime Minister Vados Nanos stated, "Organizing free and fair elections is more important than the result itself. The priority of keeping our election system just is key to preserving integrity in our government."
Federalists in favor of Article 1, Section 4 argued that Congress's power to regulate and standardize federal elections was necessary to guard against enemy occupants and uncooperative states. This proved advantageous during the British occupation of Georgia and South Carolina in 1782 and during Shays' Rebellion. A uniform election process would also allow the federal government to pass legislation that benefits the voters, such as the Voting Rights Act and the Help America Vote Act. After the controversial 2000 elections, the Help America Vote Act was passed to amend the faulty procedures that were present in Florida.
However, a uniform election system has its disadvantages because it could usurp state sovereignty. This would impede flexibility and restrict the functioning of laboratories of democracy. For example, Wyoming couldn't have given women the first right to vote, and Florida couldn't have introduced early voting.
In her dissent in Rucho v. Common Cause, Justice Kagan emphasized that free and fair elections are critical to the foundation of our government. We believe that a free and fair election is one that not only encourages people to vote, but also one that provides equal opportunities for voters to access the polls and to have their vote counted. State legislatures' responsibility to uphold this lies in drawing district lines and passing laws that promote free and fair elections rather than inhibiting them. For example, Delaware's legislature recently voted to allow registered voters to cast their ballots at polling places up to 10 days before Election Day, thus allowing broader access to the polls. Additionally, state election officials are responsible for registering voters, explaining the voting process, providing ballots, and monitoring elections.
For example, organizations such as the National Association of State Election Directors help assist all voters, including college students and those overseas. Additionally, We believe citizens are responsible for their voice and their vote. As James Madison states in Federalist 51, the people are the fountain of all authority. Citizens should exercise their right to vote and their freedom of expression in order to maintain the democratic principles of America.
Leading up to and following the results of an election, a candidate might either act as a trustee or a delegate. The trustee theory of representation, which was supported by Edmund Burke, is advantageous because representatives have access to government information and dedicated support staff. Nevertheless, the trustee theory has its faults in the sense that it potentially disregards the will of the people.
This is where the advantages of the delegate theory lie, because with a delegate as a representative, the voice of the constituents is heard and acted upon, thus creating a more representative government. However, the delegate theory of representation is disadvantageous because constituents may be in favor of legislation based on parochial self-interest that ultimately passes if representatives are acting as delegates. However, the Politico theory combines aspects of both models of representation. This theory allows for representatives to use their expert knowledge on complex issues, but also allows for the people's wishes to be fulfilled.
Maintaining equitable elections takes a collective effort from state, local, and federal governments. If this effort fails, we lose the key aspects of our democracy. As Senator Bernie Sanders expressed, election days come and go, but the struggle of the people to create a government based on principle of justice, that struggle continues. This concludes our statement. We are now ready for follow-up.
Thank you. Very nice presentation. In your view, what are some of the reasons or concerns held by the framers that motivated the drafting of Article 1, Section 4? And do you see any of those reasons or concerns present in our time?
In Federalist 10, James Madison states that men in office are tenacious in power, and I think that this has been seen throughout today with people of power disregarding the common democratic principles, and this can also be shown in other nations such as Hungary when their new governor was elected and democratically, but became a dictator over the time of the corona pandemic.
I think an important aspect of the Constitution, that when it was originally wrote, as we said in our statement, is that its intent was to protect against elections could continue if there was war, and to give power to the states, because during that time period, taking election power away from the states would have been very controversial, as in England, the British did not allow them to elect their leaders that would have gone to Parliament.
And this is a form of representation called virtual representation.
Thank
So
you.
you've talked a lot about the responsibilities of citizens and local election officials, but what about Congress? What's the scope of power that the Elections Clause gives to Congress? For example, does the Elections Clause give Congress the right to determine the qualification of voters on the state level?
So the voting amendments have created more power over Congress over elections to create equality in elections, such as establish the one person, one vote in Baker v. Carter. These Congress has the power to make sure that everyone is treated more equally in voting, such as like the 15th Amendment, which created voting rights for African Americans, which is what the Voting Right Act was created after.
Additionally, members of Congress have made attempts to help with gerrymandering issues in the states. After the Supreme Court declared it a political question, members of Congress have proposed acts such as the John Tanner Fairness and Independence and Redistricting Act.
As well as they suggested to even move the presidential election in our HR 1 bill to have a national holiday.
I'd like to ask you about the constitutional amendments that deal with voting. And can you tell us what are those amendments and how do they square with Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution?
Well, the 23rd Amendment was created after the Vietnam War when soldiers who were of age to be in the Vietnam War thought it was unfair that they were allowed to enter into the military but not be allowed to vote for who was running the country during the time of the war. So it lowered the voting age from the age of 21 to 18.
And to
I
correct
think
that was the 26th Amendment.
Yeah. I also think that the constitutionality of what Congress has from 141, Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1, is different powers than what they create by amendments, as they can change. In Foster v. Love, they found that they can change different things according to election dates, not election dates, but different things regarding federal elections. But the amendments create it so that they can create regulations for all different elections, federal and local, so that the 19th Amendment was created so all women could vote in all different elections. And so it's the 15th Amendment that all African Americans could vote in all different elections, not just federal elections.
To continue with the question about the scope of congressional authority to correct state action, do you suppose that the coronavirus might provide the occasion for Congress to overrule states and provide for some uniform elections, perhaps nationwide mail-in ballots? Anything, any ideas along those lines?
I do think that this is a possibility. As established in South Dakota v. Dole, Congress can actually use funds and essentially bribe certain states to act a certain way in order to do something. And although in South Dakota v. Dole, the issue was roads and drinking age, I feel like that is applicable now with the coronavirus. If Congress feels that a state is not acting a certain way, they could possibly use the allocation of funds or use Article 1, Section 4 in order to compel the state to act a certain way.
The Congress has recently proposed the Vote Safe Act of 2020, and it was introduced by Senator Kamala Harris, and it would provide federal funds for making polling places safer, and it also would allow for 20 days of in-person voting, and it would allow for all mail-in ballot, absentee ballots as well. So this is trying to create uniformity in order to have more of a fair election for everyone that's going through this pandemic.
I think it's important to mention that states should be able to regulate what they do, because different states have different expectations, such as in New York, where they are having a worse pandemic situation. And so the governor has changed their election date to June 9th, but states like Wyoming might not have the same issues for their elections.
That's time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, that was a very nice presentation, and I enjoyed the opportunity to ask questions and hear your answers. We'll now provide some feedback for you. Professor Rogers?
So I enjoyed your presentation. You hit all the bases in terms of answering the question with good information about current legislation, the Voting Rights Act, the Help America Vote Act, good historical references. I would have liked to heard a little bit more about an opening reference you made to state behavior during British occupation, the Shays Rebellion. Those are interesting examples because they came before the Constitution was created. And I didn't know whether if you meant that they were sort of a warning to the framers that they had to have some restraints on the states, or you thought they came under the umbrella of the Constitution. That might have been a little clearer. Your response to questions was good. On the question of the scope of congressional power and whether it touched on the qualifications for voting, I thought you got a start on that question, but didn't quite answer it. You were right that the amendments to the Constitution are important in in defining the qualification for voters, but you didn't quite come to say, does Article 1, Section 4 cover qualification of voters? And I would think it does not, or most of the times it does not. We did a good job mentioning the amendments to that affect the voting rights. So a lot of good information. I thought was a good presentation.
Judge Taubman?
I think you did a very nice job in your presentation. I like your opening quotation from the Albanian Prime Minister that shows that you went out of your way to do research to find a quote about the importance of free and fair elections. So I appreciated that. I like your reference to the Voting Rights Act and the Help America Vote Act. There are other federal laws that have been enacted to deal with the right to voting, such as the motor voter law that you might have mentioned too. But I think that that was good. I like your quoting from Justice Kagan's dissent in Rucho about the importance of free and fair elections. And I like your discussion of the trustee and versus delegate theory and the hybrid political theory. I thought that showed a good understanding of those two conflicting approaches and how they've been reconciled by some people. And I like in your responses your reference to Federalist 10 by Madison, and I really like your point about in answering my questions about the amendments, about the fact that the suffrage amendments applied to both federal and state elections. That's a point that we haven't heard before from other teams, so I thought that was a very good point. There are a few other amendments that I'm sure you're familiar with that you might have mentioned, but didn't get a chance to do so. But overall, I think you all did a very nice job.
I concur in my colleagues' appraisal of your performance. I think it was very well done. I enjoyed listening to your wide-ranging references from Albania to Edmund Burke to South Dakota versus Dole. I appreciated the breadth of your knowledge and the fact that you have had those cases and historical citations readily at hand. I thought that your answer to my question about congressional power to intervene in the circumstances of a virus was a very, very nice reaction. Better actually than my first question about congressional intervention. You seem prepared to address the circumstances and the possibility of the need for Congress to take action given the circumstance of the virus. When I asked the first time about those reasons or concerns that motivated the framers, and were any of them relevant to our time, one of the concerns, of course, was that states could dismember the Union by making election sites so spare and by having a voice vote, right, instead of a secret ballot. And I think that gave you the opportunity to talk about voter suppression if you wanted to pursue that. But there, you covered a great deal. You can't cover everything. You need about an hour to talk about this question. I think you'll agree. But I enjoyed this very much, and you were obviously well prepared, and that's a tribute to your teacher. And so I want to wish you good luck the rest of the way. And again, congratulations on being